Hello and welcome to episode 2 of me making a song every week and showing you the whole breakdown of the session. This week is honestly proof that this experiment is working, because this song would not be out if I wasn't doing this process. I 100% would still be tweaking it. I would still be wrestling with the mix and feeling like it's too muddy to show to the world, and I'm honestly really glad I'm doing this, because I don't think that would be helpful or beneficial to me at this point. I am excited to get to something new and excited to put this behind me. I took on some things that I'm not maybe the most comfortable with, some mixing challenges, genres that I don't typically produce. So this is good. It's good to confront that, also have a deadline upon which you can move on from it. But I think it's good. I think it's worth listening to, and it's up on SoundCloud if that's something you want to do. Much like last time, I'm gonna kind of try to go in order of how I made the song. Obviously, the process is not as clean as it looks when I talk about the song. It's very messy, and you try things and you delete things. So the first thing I did, I was working on another song, just experimenting vocals to go on top of it, and I had auto-tune all the way down to 0, no note transition time. I did and it just kind of sounded cool with the auto-tune on it. It wasn't but when you stick the back of your tongue to the top of the roof of your mouth, and it just sounded kind of weird, and I thought, that's cool, let me make something with that. And then there's a little almost slapback delay. It's actually tighter than a slapback, but tiny little delay for a tiny amount of color. That's just some sound designer neuroses that I actually think it did anything. So this is that track. The track is in 4/4 and the tempo is 158. And my vision was I wanted to trick the listener into thinking that it was in 6/8 for the first few bars of the song, bring in the drums so that you could then see that it was actually in 4/4. Hence why this ended up being the intro to the song. So it would sound like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. So that's why it's only 3 bars at the start of the song and not 4. Next thing I did was the bass. The bass was just a Tal noisemaker preset. I think it had delay and I got rid of the delay or something like that. But other than that, I didn't do much to it, but I did add this amp as an audio effect onto it. If you don't know, Tal noisemaker, it's a free knockoff of the Juno. I have the Juno. Well, I have the Arturia Juno plugin, and I still like using this thing sometimes. It has weird presets, just wonky ass presets. And some of them are very fun. Some of them are very crispy, and it's free. So if you are looking for a new toy to play around with, I recommend the Tal noisemaker, especially if you're into weird EDM. I will say, once I'm deep into a song, I don't go searching because it has really niche stuff. It's more for song starters, but it's weird bass noises. It's good for that. So let's hear this without the amp. Originally, I actually had that sound without the amp on it, and then I added this amp to give it a little boost on the choruses. Then I ended up adding another bass sound on the choruses that we'll get to in a bit. So I was left with the ability to use just that sound with the amp, and it ended up sounding better. But this is the bass sound with the amp. Big and beefy, of course. That was the starter for the track. After that came drums. I used my good dance kick as opposed to my bad one. This is one of those kicks that I made once upon a time and now I use always. It is just 2 kick samples layered on top of each other. It's never let me down. And it's a simple drum pattern. The snare that I have since labeled soft snare because I then introduced a big snare, but we'll get to that in a minute. And some hats on a hat rack. And if you don't know what a hat rack is, brief moment to plug my TikTok and my short form channels. I have videos on little tips and tricks and production stuff. So if you're less interested in the holistics on how to make a track, how I approach the whole creative process, and more the little how-tos, I have a lot of stuff there. Especially if you're into really niche nerdy sound design stuff, we get into that over there. Introducing drums. I think the next thing that I did was get like a scratch vocal idea. I didn't have lyrics at the time, just like the melody. I mean, this is obviously the final vocal that I recorded, but just to show kind of the order in which this whole thing was created. Thick piece in a magazine, scented cogs in a machine, Christmas tree in early spring, why does one do anything? Summer greed and hokusai, should pay someone to tell me why. I try to find myself inside the epitome of human mind. I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about lyrics, which kind of happened in parallel to just me working on the track itself. I was having a bit of an existential crisis at the time of writing this, so that is what this is about. Run-of-the-mill, late 20s, what am I doing with my life situation. So I kind of wanted to play with the idea of how that, I hope relatable existential crisis of what am I meant to be doing is also kind of very self-important, because it implies that like I have some higher purpose and I'm destined for something that I should be achieving, and that if I didn't expect much of myself, then I would just be a lot calmer about everything. So that's kind of the lyrical idea for it. The self-importance ego that fuels your average existential crisis. I then went into crafting the hook. So I did like a variation on the bass line, something a little more hooky, just sounds more like a melody. So this is the bass line of the chorus / hook, whatever you want to call it. And I later in the process ended up adding this top for the bass. So this is the Mini V4 from the Arturia pack. So yeah, I do use this a lot because I paid good money for them. I actually finished paying them off recently, so I'm the proud owner of these plugins. I think this was based off of a preset, but then I did change a lot of things about it, and I called it bass. For context, that bass sound is actually me queuing out the lower stuff. The bass that I have throughout the rest of the song is taking care of that, and I'm not crowding the low end. Without the EQ and all on its own, it sounds like this. And then with the EQ. So it just adds a little cherry on top of the existing bass. Then I had this like verse hook structure. I didn't really feel like it needed any more sections. So structurally, this song is just ridiculously simple. It is just like verse, hook, verse, hook, verse, double length hook. Originally, these hooks were like twice as long as they are. And I just kind of kept trimming sections down until I was like, yeah, this song doesn't want to be long. Then came the drums for the chorus. And those were a bit of a trip. I went the drum and bass route. Full disclosure, like drum and bass is not something I make often. It's not really something I've experimented with. I love listening to it, but I don't have a ton of experience making it. And that lack of experience was felt. So I did a combination of research and trial and error. So changed up obviously the drum pattern and also the drum sounds. At first I was using the same sounds and it just sounded not drum and bassy. It didn't sound big and chaotic enough. So I ended up using different kick sounds. This was the verse kick. This was the chorus kick. Shorter snare from the verse to like the bigger, more resonant snare for the chorus. Hella more reverb and a little bit of delay too. And same with the hats also. These are tighter and smaller. These are just a little more clanky. I feel like that's very much the breakbeat sound. All in all, this was the DnB chorus section of the drums. Also automated some redux on the whole thing, bit crushing, sampling down, all that sort of thing. So you can see this is automated on and off to just be on those hooks. So from this point on in the video, I'm gonna abandon the chronological experience of writing the song, not go in the order in which I created things because I feel like that'll start to get confusing. It was kind of just jumping around, seeing what I could do in different parts. So I'm gonna just kind of go chronologically in order of the song itself now. First up, we have this pad that I did mention in my last video. My glue for everything pad. She's always the answer. She's always the solution. So the verse did need just a little something halfway through because it was getting a little bit boring. Spring, why does one do anything? Summer great and and that's her. I did eliminate the echo that I normally have on it as well as the reverb. I feel like that section is already trying to sound quite dry. I did want this to contrast with the hook, which is super spacious and delayed. This normally would have a little more sub. There's just already enough bass in the track, and this was really just meant to like fill in a little bit of space so that it doesn't feel as sparse for quite as long. Then in the hook, that's when I brought in this pad. This pad is actually a resampling of this other pad. So this is a pad that I was initially trying to use in the verses. It kind of sounds okay here. It wasn't subtle enough for what I wanted to go on over here. But let me play that pad. It's a much busier pad sound. This is actually from Razor. I did mess with some of the things on this. I wish I could tell you what, but I don't actually remember. Oh, and I do have this LFO mapped to the balance of the track, so it's kind of panning back and forth just subtly to give a little movement. And I threw this EQ on it because it was a little too intrusive. I didn't need all that, so. But for the chorus, I wanted it to have movement at the top of the sound. And this sound does have some pitch bend. I wanted something that when I applied a crazy amount of delay to on that chorus, we could hear the delay. So something had to happen on the attack of whatever that pad was. I played this an octave higher, like at double the speed, pitched it down 12 semitones to kind of give it that like downsampled sound or like the breakbeat vibes. Also obviously have this delay on there, EQ'd it out a little bit more because this one was meant to take up a higher portion, and threw a spectral resonator on there. She sounds really crunchy and dirty, and that was like the mission, the whole hook with all those layers. Next in this verse 2, the main thing that does keep the energy alive, obviously it comes down, but I didn't want it to totally feel like we're going back to square one. So I'm still using the drum sounds from the drum and bass like hook and introduced more percussion. So there's these toms, technically toms, but they're like pitched up, as well as this ride here. And so this is what the drums of the verse section now sound like. And obviously I'm withholding the hats so that we can have another moment of just another change, another opportunity for things to evolve a little bit. The next hook, I did want to include this sound, which is also from Razor. I did very little to this one, I think, and I'll play it without these audio effects. This was going over the second hook. I wanted it to get like dirtier and more chaotic as the song went on. But obviously saturated and delayed. The fun thing that I did there to add a little bit of movement was automate on that delay the time. So here it's at an eighth note, and then I moved it up to 3/16 in this part of the melody because I felt like that 3/16 was a little more chaotic. This is what that sounds like. And then it comes back. And to kind of build into that a little more organically, over here in verse 2, I started introducing like that same beep, but keeping it on G sharp because that's what the has been doing this whole time. So I wanted it to like not come in guns blazing. I wanted to ease it into the conversation. This is what verse 2 sounds like with like everything discussed, the razor pad, that little beep kind of coming in, and the aforementioned drums. And then verse 3 obviously is when things come back down again. So here you can see I go back to the drum sounds from the first verse, this time with these toms that I included in verse 2 that are a little like quirky and fun. I also ended up recording these little like blip sounds. This is just me going like into the mic. Have like a tight little delay on there, auto filtered to just make it sound less human and more machine. Just chopped every now and again for effect. I like having sounds that sound somewhere between human and synthesized, and hence my love for like chopping vocals and processing vocals and things like that. Verse 2 texturally gets a lot smaller, and even you can see the vocal is like almost whispered because I'm building up to like something bigger. Now that everything is a lot sparser, I'm also using the same but pitched up 4 semitones. So this is doing a G sharp, this is doing a B. I actually also introduced that halfway through verse 1. So together. And then the whole second verse without the vocals sounds like this. Oh, and to cut out the bass so that I could then kind of come back in. We're kind of rapidly evolving towards the biggest part of the song. So then the bass comes in. And the same pattern from before. Then we have the final chorus. We're back to our breakbeat kick and our bigger snare and our drum and bass for hat rack. Same bass line though. And then this lead kind of doing the same thing. I bring in this pad from the previous hooks, but only halfway through so that we have a bit of a build up. But really the fun comes from the vocal. So I guess let's start talking about the vocals. Last video I did mention that I typically record my vocals outside in a separate session so as to avoid lag. Here I honestly wasn't getting the worst lag of my life. It really wasn't that bad. And I also could not be bothered. So I did record it directly into this session and it was kind of fine. I did end up dragging things back a little bit to compensate for lag, but honestly, I find myself doing that on the external session anyways, which means that everything I did to the vocals is in this session and we can look at it. This vocal chain is kind of intense because I was going for a really dirty, grungy little sound. I'll admit this is something that I kind of wrestled with in the mixing stage, but you know what? I did what I could. So this here is doing the heavy lifting. I EQ'd out all the low frequencies, all the high frequencies to give it like this kind of boxy, shitty recording device effect. So this is with the EQ.
Think piece in a magazine, 17 cogs in a machine.
And without.
Christmas tree in early spring. Why does one do anything?
Compressed it a good bit. The auto tune times all the way down. Then comes the fun part. Here I have just so many effects. So I've turned off all of these effects and I'll turn them on one by one so we can hear what each of them is doing.
Think piece in a magazine,
this delay with the time super duper low and kind of filtering the highs on it so that it really just brings up the highs a little bit. This doubler is also pretty subtle.
I try to find myself inside the epitome
Next we have this amp, still not super strong though, and a saturator also kind of dirtying it up.
Summer great and Hokusai. Should pay someone to tell me why.
Honestly, the vocal effects are not crazy in this part of the song, but as you can see, there is this macro over here. It has a lot of things mapped to it. I basically mapped to it anything that I thought might be able to fuck up the sound and just make it really nasty. Because that was the vision for the end here, was automate the sound to just get nastier and nastier until it sounds just like a trashy recording of God knows what. I have mapped the feedback of that delay so it should ring out more and more as I crank it up. Dry wet of the doubler, the dry wet of the amp, and the dry wet of the saturator. I set their minimums to whatever I wanted it to be throughout most of the track, and then the maximums to 100. So when I automated all of that up, it would just continue to get more and more intense. And obviously all of that is being applied on the light comes through part of the vocal that just repeats over and over again on the last chorus. So we can listen to that happening. Also, there is this delay here that is automated on halfway through, set to 3/8. So it just makes it a lot more chaotic when it comes in.
Light comes through, 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 light comes through,
As soon as the delay comes in, it gets a lot more intense. Now, as far as the chopping, really just taking this one clip, repeating it over and over again, and then occasionally doubling a little syllable like here,
Light comes through, light comes
or
through,
here.
light comes through.
And here on the through, got the grid nice and fine and just removed to every other section to get this like.
Light comes through.
And that's all for the lead vocal. And then there's this one tiny random little ad lib on the chorus, which has most of the same effects as well as just an auto filter to really make it sound extra boxy and extra trashy. And that's it for instrumentation as well as vocals. The last thing I do want to talk about is the transitions from section to section. I think that's probably one of the most important things in making a track feel anything remotely approaching finished. I feel like without that extra work, it really just does sound like a demo. Let's go section by section and talk about what's keeping it all together. So first, from the intro, we've got just the little and the drums. Nothing else happening at the moment. So to announce the coming of the first verse, I just cut out snare and hats for that last bar and ride. Just enough to let the listener know that something's about to happen. The transition into the first hook is a pretty obvious one. Cut out all the drums, bring in a crash, and then a reverse kick leading into the hook. Everything gets cut out: bass, pad, drums.
Self inside, the epitome of human minds.
Going from the second verse into the hook. Honestly, this is one of my favorite things I did on this track. I got rid of the snares, changed up the kick a little bit, and changed the hats to just be like quarter notes. So this is the rhythm that they are doing. Obviously, there's a ride on that last downbeat before the hook, and we get this. But the actual magic comes from the automation. So this is the delay send over here being automated up so that it gets really splashy and chaotic right before that hook. And then the drums end up sounding like this. Also, the reverb has a similar automation going on. That was probably one of my more effective transitions. And then obviously there's a crash in the downbeat and there's a little riser leading up to it. Tiny adjustment in the melody, I think, is doing more than meets the eye. All it does is like go down the scale into the leading note of the next section, but I think it's just enough to kind of guide you into it. So the whole section sounds like this. And last but not least, we have the transition from the verse into that last chorus, which is obviously the big payoff. It's meant to be super big, super dramatic. I think the real transitional element here is just this extra bar. We say light comes through like one extra time before the actual drop happens. Obviously there's like a crash on the last one before the like fake out drop before the actual drop, and then a riser leading into the actual drop. And so this is what that section sounds like.
comes through, light comes through, light comes through, light comes through, light comes through.
And kind of paralleling that, we do end the song with another extra light comes through thing. So I don't know, I feel like that wraps it up kind of nicely. And that's it. I think that's actually it for this song. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. If there's any requests for how I should go about these videos in the future, if I'm like actually giving insight into the process that you think is valuable, because if not, we can change that up for sure. That being said, thank you for sticking around as long as you did. Or if you fast forwarded, no shame in that. Totally respect it. Thanks for being here at all. Tune in next week as I describe whatever the hell came into my mind to make this time. I actually have no idea what next week's song is going to be. I'm a little bit nervous about that fact, but in a week's time, we'll know how that went. Be sure to subscribe if you want to be aware of whenever I am posting these videos. That's it.